Well, I just don't want to wait for anything else to go wrong. So we might as well get going, huh?
For the Podcast 99 Network, I'm Alex Ross with the news. An Oklahoma sheriff and all of her deputies have quit in protest of dangerous and possibly lethal conditions inside of an old rural county jail. Nowata County Sheriff Terry Barnett said that the dilapidated jail had near-toxic carbon monoxide and mold levels and no fire alarms, among other issues. Prisoners have been housed in another separate jail since the end of February due to safety concerns. An audit from the American Correctional Association listed out all of the facility's problems in a 69-page report earlier this month. But Judge Carl Gibson said that he would hold Sheriff Bennett in contempt of court if she did not reopen the jail. At a news conference on Monday, Sheriff Bennett announced that she, along with her undersheriff, deputies, head dispatcher, and the majority of the jail staff were all resigning over the inexcusable conditions. Police in South Korea say that more than 1,500 hotel guests were secretly filmed, with footage of them live-streamed over the internet. The illicit activity was discovered in 30 separate hotels across 10 South Korean cities. Small cameras had been hidden in TV boxes, wall sockets, and hairdryer holders, streaming footage to a website with more than 4,000 members paying monthly fees to access the video. So far, 4 men have been arrested, but the issue of spy cameras in South Korea has continued to grow. In 2017, there were more than 6,400 cases of illegal filming reported to police, leading to the formation of a special squad of female inspectors who routinely visit public bathrooms and search them for hidden cameras. And on this day in history, in 1980, President Jimmy Carter informs a group of U.S. athletes that, in response to the December 1979 Soviet incursion into Afghanistan, the United States will not be participating in the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow, marking the first and so far only U.S. Olympic boycott. For the Podcast 99 Network, I'm Alex Ross.
Buy with Rob is your best choice when purchasing your new home in the Puget Sound area. Call 360-710-9425 today and get started on the best home buying experience you will ever have. Go to buywithrob.com today.
Weather today.
They're solid plastic, so don't settle for imitation.
But the senator, while insisting he was not intoxicated, could not explain his nudity.
Okay, CT fans, it's time to rise up and apply some knowledge to your day. 10 states are down, 3 are left. Next up comes the grand tale of Alexander Hamilton. He was Washington's right-hand man. And if you think that we know the story, wait for it. You're in for a surprise or two, my children. History has its eyes upon you, and in the end, who lives, who dies, and who tells your story is less about the truth than the narrative. And that's why Hamilton is a Broadway play, and George Clinton gets a pass. All right, my children, this is Constitution Thursday with more history and liberty and Dave Bowman.
Well, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever you do. A lot of things happening in the world today. Most of them are far beyond our control, you might say. So perhaps it's time we took a pause and thought about life and thought about the laws of gravity. Clinton, Hamilton, New York, ratification politics, and news. Don't touch that dial. Just try to hear me out for a while. One of the two men has a Broadway, if questionably historically, musical. The other gets no respect from Google at all. But these two men will control the debate in New York. What else is new? Am I right? Here's how you get a hold of me. Text machine area code 209-565-DAVE. It's 565-3283. Email Dave at thedavebowmanshow.com. And I am struggling today. I'm just going to tell you that point blank because you can see my eyes are about to just... It's atomic pollen day. First full day of spring. It's atomic pollen day. You can hear it in my voice. My nose is, I'm probably going to have to stop and sneeze at some point. So that's the way it goes when this whole thing starts out. So 10 states have ratified. Virginia has now ratified, and we're waiting on New York. As you think about all the states and their ratification processes, New York is not the largest state by far and away. In fact, she's the fourth largest by population. Oddly enough, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina are all ahead of her. But she is perhaps the most important of the states because of commerce, because of her port situation. She has the city and port of New York. And while there are other ports around the country, they're further away from this centralized location that New York is. They're not as big as New York. They're not as powerful as New York. And there's a lot of advantages to New York City. New York has been debating the Constitution since the very beginning. The Federalist Papers, as we know them today, they weren't known as that specifically then, but as we know them today, the Federalist Papers were specifically written for the people of New York. These were written because there are certain issues in New York that do not exist anywhere else. There are four main issues that New York is going to face in considering ratification, and one gigantic issue. And that issue is so big that it deserves its own name. In fact, the name that is coined for this problem is coined for this singular man, and his name is George Clinton. And he is the reason that we call them anti-federalists. He is the very embodiment of the arguments against ratification of Constitution. Now, you need to understand some things about George. The first thing you really got to understand about George Clinton is that Google, for whatever reason, doesn't much like him. If you Google George Clinton, you will get George Clinton of Parliament and Funkadelic, which I love. Don't get me wrong. I love 70s funk music, and Parliament was the best. But you got to really, you got to know what you're looking for if you want to find this George Clinton, who was not just the governor of the state of New York, but he would also go on to become a two-term vice president of the United States, and he would be the first elected official of the United States to die in office. So he's actually a pretty important guy, and he is absolutely dead set against ratification of the Constitution. As governor of the state of New York, he is vehemently opposed, not violently, but vehemently. He is the man for whom the term anti-federalist is actually invented. He is the first, he's the founding member, I guess, if you will, of the funky anti-federalists and their unwillingness to consider things. And this is why the Federalist Papers are actually written, because George Clinton, as governor of the state of New York, has a lot of power and a lot of say and a big old bully pulpit. Now, you need to understand that that's not his nature. He is not a man given to making pompous speeches. He's not a guy that responds to taunts and insults. In fact, when that all starts, and Alexander Hamilton will start in the media really pinging on him, he doesn't really respond all that much. He just sort of lets it go. He lets others speak in his defense. He doesn't really worry too much about it. Unlike certain politicians today, he doesn't run and file lawsuits claiming he's being defamed or anything like that. He knows his position, he knows his power, he knows his authority, and he knows how to use it. And he's going to do that. And that's the biggest part of all this. The other side of this is that he has one gigantic, and I mean giganormous, ace card up his sleeve that he's going to play when it's time. Sorry, these pollen is killing me. We're trying. His opponent in all of this, you know him well, Alexander Hamilton, the focal point of the Broadway musical Hamilton, of historically questionable musical. But he is, in fact, a real person. He does exist, and he is probably the nation's leading Federalist. He is very much in favor of a national government. In fact, if he had his way, along with Madison at one point, they probably would have done away with state governments. Hamilton is one of those guys that believes very firmly the central government has to be it. The reasons why become pretty clear when you start getting into the debates about this whole thing. He is upset with Clinton, the governor, because of some of the things that Clinton does with regards to nationalist type government. In fact, over the preceding years under the Confederation, New York has been not uncooperative with Congress, but not exactly leading the way with national sacrifice, if you get my drift. They're kind of, and Hamilton doesn't like that. Sorry. Hamilton is, he's very much a nationalist. He's very much believing that New York should have been the first one to ratify, and it upsets him that they don't. And he is not happy about all of this stuff. And so when the Constitutional Convention finishes its work and begins the process of allowing the states to ratify things, like I said, Delaware, they almost instantaneously had to ratify it. Georgia does that. We've been through Virginia. Now we get to New York, and New York, as I said, faces some different kind of background things. You have two characters here that are really larger than life. Most people today, again, have heard of Alexander Hamilton. Why? Because of that, the musical Hamilton, an American musical, and it purports to tell the story of Alexander Hamilton. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, who knows. But it certainly has upset a lot of historians because Hamilton was both more than he is portrayed as, being on the $20 bill. And yet at the same time, like most men, he had his flaws and he had his faults. And one of those was he never figured out in his own mind how to balance honor with common sense. You can't let your honor get in the way of doing what's intelligent. And unfortunately, that was one of the things that Hamilton would be famous for. There are four main issues, as I said, with New York. New York is going to face, and the debates in New York, and we're going to talk about those in the next episode next week, but the four main issues that New York faces are really in some ways similar to what the rest of the country faces. Number one, we've talked about this before. The British were supposed to evacuate forts in 1783 when the Treaty of Paris was signed. They were supposed to leave. But they did not. They still hold 6 forts along the frontier with the United States, and they've built 2 more, so they actually have 8 forts along the frontier of the United States that they are essentially occupying United States territory with. And the claim is that they're doing it defensively. The claim is that they're doing it to protect loyalists who are continued to be subject to a lot of colonial, now American retribution. And the British aren't all that excited about leaving. And while this doesn't seem to be all that much of an existential circumstance to most people, certainly to the anti-Federalists, it's one of the arguments that Madison will use when he's talking about how, these forts are still out here. We're still, you keep saying there's no danger, but there's British troops on our land. And until we get rid of those British troops, how can we say we're secure? How can we say that we're a free nation, unoccupied and all that until we get rid of these forts? The British, as I said, they're not all that anxious to leave these forts, although they agreed to do it in 1783. Their position is that they're keeping these forts because, again, you got to listen to this very carefully, because the United States have not met their obligations under the treaty as well. One of those obligations is that they are supposed to reimburse loyalists for their losses during the American Revolutionary War. So if you happen to be a loyalist and you owned, a big house or building or something, and the colonials took it over and took it away from you, under the terms of the treaty, the British believe that they're supposed to get their money back or their property back, and that's not happening. Specifically not happening in New York. And so their position is, until that starts happening, we are going to continue to occupy these forts. The second issue is Vermont. New York, and especially Governor Clinton, do not like the idea of Vermont. Now, Vermont is an interesting study in our history. of statehood. Vermont, for all practical purposes, has been a self-governing state since 1777, for all practical purposes. It has its own flag. It raises its own militia, the Nathaniel Greene and the Green Mountain Boys, and they fight successfully in the American Revolution. But the problem is that the land that Vermont occupies is claimed by both New Hampshire and New York. And King George, in the inimitable British style to make sure that the subjects keep fighting each other and not him, when he divides the two colonies, he makes sure that it's kind of obscure as to how they're actually divided, because he wants to make sure they're arguing with each other and not him. There's a lot of unclarity here about Vermont, and of course Vermont wants to just be a state. They just want both to go away. New Hampshire is actually okay with this. New Hampshire just basically says, yeah, go be a state. We don't care. But New York, they don't see it quite the same way. And at one point, Governor Clinton actually threatens to invade Vermont during the from what we call the Confederation period, from 1780 or so to the adoption of the Constitution. He actually threatens to invade Vermont with his militia because he's tired of these people saying that they're their own state. No, you're not. You're ours. We own you. You're going to pay our taxes. You're going to pay our imposts. You're going to do things the way we do. And stop. And for God's sake, stop giving loyalists their money back. Don't do that. And so he actually threatens to invade them at one point. It's a pretty amazing thing if you think about it. The sitting governor of a state threatening to invade another going-to-be state someday because he doesn't like the way they're running their government. But that's kind of George Clinton in a nutshell. But he's a very astute politician. You need to understand that New York, under his governorship, and he will be the longest sitting governor of New York until the 21st century, I guess, 20th century. Was it 2009? So that would be 21st century. He is remarkably moderate. And you need to understand that under his leadership, New York is the most economically successful state in the Union. In fact, in 1788, the New York State Treasury has over $3 million, that's 1788 money, in its surplus that it is using to continue to build its economy, to continue to improve its infrastructure, and most importantly, to keep its taxes low. People are very happy with Governor Clinton. Well, let's say about 70% of the people are happy with Governor Clinton because he is keeping taxes very low and the economy in New York is booming. The Depression of 1780 barely scratches New York, and he has brought them through that and out of it, and New York is really doing well. It's New York, folks. I mean, what would you expect, right? I mean, you can see behind me on the street. Commerce is happening in New York here. This is the place to be. This is the booming place. Now, as will always happen, there are people who are not happy with what he's doing. Number one, he's using his political patronage, and the governor of New York has a lot of power when it comes to patronage. He can give out offices. He can assign people to boards. He can do a lot of that kind of stuff. And in doing so, he has managed to piss off the people that oppose him politically because he keeps, skipping over them to give it to people that are backing him. Well, again, he is very much a populist, and he's very much a middle-class guy. The middle class in New York is booming. The lower classes are booming in New York. It's really only the upper crust that isn't getting the benefits that they're used to getting. It's not that they're doing poorly. It's just that they're not in charge, and they don't like that at all. You need to really grasp what I'm saying here. You need to get my facial intensity. They don't like that. They don't care that everybody else is doing good. They're not in charge. And that's, to paraphrase Sir Humphrey, it's not when the wrong people, when it's, if the right people aren't in power, then the wrong people are. And that's their issue. The number 3 issue that they have in New York is the Loyalist compensation issue. Now, under the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolutionary War, the colonial governments, the state governments now, are required to earnestly encourage their states to compensate loyalists for the money and property that they lost during the Revolutionary War. there's nothing in the treaty that says they have to do it. But the British read it differently. They read earnestly encourage as you will do this. Of course, they read it, differently than we do, and certainly differently than they do in New York. Where New York reads it, they read it as, well, we're earnestly telling you that we're not going to do that. There's some reasons why New York isn't going to do that. We'll get into that in just a second. It's sort of, as I said, required by the Treaty of Paris, but not specifically required by the Treaty of Paris. And that's why the British are still in the forts, because they think that that the states are supposed to be doing this, and some of them are, but New York is adamantly saying no. They believe that earnestly recommend by Congress means that Congress will tell them to do that. They don't really understand that Congress really doesn't have any power here, that the state governments are sovereign. And New York, as I said, strongly opposes compensation to loyalists. Why? Well, of all the states in the American Revolution, it is New York that really suffers at the hands of the British. Now, other states had damage done. Certainly in the South, there was some hanky-panky, but it's New York that has a good section of the city destroyed by the British. They regularly have towns burned. They regularly have fields destroyed. New York has suffered, as Governor Clinton would say, New York has suffered as no other state has at the hands of the British, and specifically at the hands of the Loyalists. Why would we recompense them for the destruction that they caused? Screw you, is kind of his attitude. We're not giving them anything back. We won. Tough bananas. It's ours. And of course, it's this issue that is keeping the British in America. It's this issue that is keeping New York from eagerly agreeing to a national government, because they believe that a national government is going to come in and give all these loyalists all that money. And where are they going to get that money to give them? Well, the New Yorkers kind of assume that they're going to take it from New York, since they have money to spend. And so Governor Clinton is adamantly opposed to this. But, of course, guess who's for it? Hamilton. Hamilton loves the idea of recompensing these guys, and Clinton says, nope. And you might think that those three issues in and of themselves would be enough, but they're not even the most important issue. The most important issue is what's called the impost issue. The impost, now an impost is essentially a tax on imported goods. So ship comes into New York Harbor, dockmaster goes out there, harbor master goes out there, they get a manifest to the ship. They say, okay, you got this much worth of goods. You have to pay this much in impost tax before you can unload it. That money goes to the state of New York, right? And that impost money then funds the operation of New York. They start doing this in 1784, before the Constitution goes into effect. And all of the states to some degree do this. All of the states to some degree cause this to happen. But it's New York's that actually works. Why? Because they actually have a real deep water port in New York. Boston, it's harder to do in Boston because of the Sons of Liberty. They don't like that. But New York, under Clinton, sees the wisdom in this. So they start doing it in 1784. And it ends up raising enough money that it funds almost 50% of the state expenses. So in other words, half of what it costs to run the government of the state of New York comes from those impost taxes. Guess where the other half comes from? Yeah, loyalist property that they're slowly selling off and taking care of. And because of this, New York has the lowest taxes in the nation. The people, as I said, really love this. The vast majority of the people of New York, they keep reelecting this guy over and over and over again because they love the fact that he is a centrist, a populist, that he doesn't seem to be a hothead, and that he's protecting their interests. And this is really what you see in colonial or in Confederation America. When you have state sovereign governments, they want to see people protect their interests. They don't want people protecting the national interest, and they're afraid that if the national government comes in, it's going to screw over the state, and they don't want that. Things are going great here in New York. Why would you mess with it? And Governor Clinton adamantly opposes ratification of the Constitution because he believes on those issues, New York will lose to a national government. And he's watched Congress through the years not be able to manage money, not be able to do things properly, not be able to handle anything. And so he's reticent, and vocally so. And as the debate begins in 1787, in September of 87, as the Constitution is presented to the people and the debate begins, Clinton is really not on board with this. He really doesn't want to do it. And so Hamilton really begins to viciously attack him in the media. Well, that doesn't happen today, right? No politician's ever been picked on like they have today. Yeah, right. These people might want to go and maybe, I don't know, watch a musical or two, right? I mean, maybe they might learn something. At any rate, Clinton is above the fray. He maintains this very distinguished attitude towards the whole thing. He's Devin Nunes could learn a lot from George Clinton, but the point is that Clinton has his people that handle the debates for him. He maintains his governorship in a very high standard, and he knows that he's speaking from power because his people love him. And why is it that his people love him? What is it that is about these two men that connects them together, that makes the people of the state of New York love one and tolerate the other? Both of them, by the way, are Revolutionary War generals. Both of them served under Washington. Both of them are war heroes in the sense of the Revolutionary War. Both of them are very close friends with Washington, as we know, and yet they are diametrically opposed on this issue, the Constitution. Washington maintains his friendship with Clinton, even though he kind of drifts away from Hamilton. And why is it that all of this happened? Well, like most things, and you need to understand this undercurrent of things. Alexander Hamilton is, at the time, he was a soldier. He was serving under Washington during the war. In 1777, there came an opportunity to elect a new governor of New York. A guy by the name of Schuyler was running. Schuyler was a very rich landowner, Philip Schuyler. He was an American general. He was also a Revolutionary War hero. He was very, very wealthy because he owned a lot of land. Now, in New York in 1777, in order to vote for governor, you had to be a landowner, or you had to have a 21-year or longer lease on a piece of land. And oddly enough, Mr. Schuyler had a whole lot in central New York. He had hundreds of these plots of land that he had leased out for 21 years to people that he then believed, because he had been so benevolent to them as a landlord, they would show up and vote for him, right? Well, his opponent in the election, believe it or not, as you can probably guess, is a guy by the name of George Clinton. George Clinton, again, he appeals to the populist. He's not a wealthy landowner. He's not a poor man, but he's not a Philip Schuyler. And he stands in opposition to everything that Schuyler does. But what you need to understand above all else is that Schuyler has a daughter. Her name is Elizabeth. Elizabeth Schuyler is a very beautiful woman. She is a highly prized potential bride at this time. She is, everything that a rich man's daughter is supposed to be in colonial America and in revolutionary America. She is intelligent. She is really smart. I mean, she doesn't get enough credit for how amazingly intelligent she is. I guess is the way to say it, because she's dead now, but she is really a smart gal. And her father, she's pretty excited about the fact that her father, Philip Schuyler, is running for governor of the state of New York against George Clinton, and everybody assumes that this is going to be a whitewash, that he is going to cream George Clinton. And of course, in early 1777, something happens. All those people that are leasing land from Mr. Schuyler get this idea that if this revolution is successful, we might own this land. We won't need that guy anymore. And so they kind of rebel against Mr. Schuyler. thinking to themselves that the Continental Army will show up and protect them from his retribution. Right? Well, the Continental Army does show up, and they don't protect the landowners. They don't protect them at all. In fact, they explain it to them at the point of a gun that they need to pay their rent and that they need to behave themselves or else it'll get worse for them. And so when election time comes around a few months later, oddly enough, these people aren't all that excited about going to the polls to vote for Mr. Schuler. And they don't. They don't show up at all. And Schuler gets beaten like a British drum in the gubernatorial election. And George Clinton becomes governor of the state of New York and will go on to become one of the most popular governors in the history of this country. Now, why does all of this matter? Because Elizabeth Schuler, this very intelligent, very beautiful, very capable woman, in 1780 marries Alexander Hamilton. His wife, Alexander Hamilton's wife, in 1788, when all of this debate is going on in New York about whether or not we should ratify, whether we shouldn't ratify, whether we need to ratify, when all of this is going on, Alexander Hamilton's wife is the daughter of the man who has been in political opposition to him since 1777. And if you don't believe that there aren't bad feelings in all of this, you don't know your Alexander Hamilton very well. Alexander Hamilton is a man who joined this family and automatically gloms on to their sense of loyalty, their sense of honor. And they believe that George Clinton, this incredibly successful governor who has led New York through the darkest of times and brought it out shining gloriously, needs to be not just defeated, but he needs to be embarrassed because he dares to oppose ratification of the United States Constitution. And by God, we cannot allow that to happen. And it's these two men that are really going to lead the debate in New York. Those four issues are going to matter. Those four issues are they're going to be a problem. By the way, at one point, New York agrees on the impost with Congress, but Rhode Island says no. So, big surprise there, huh? Alexander Hamilton will write the Federalist Papers. He will go to the convention and he will speak long and loud and vociferously and passionately in favor of ratification. George Clinton will use his political power, his abilities, his staff to oppose it. Now, we all know how the story is going to end. But what you don't maybe not know is that George Clinton will go on, even though he's a vehement anti-federalist, he will go on to become a two-time vice president of the United States. Because the situation worked differently. He loses the presidential election. He finishes third a couple of times and second twice. He's not a man that's against the country. He doesn't hate America. He just doesn't think that the Constitution's going to do New York good, and he wants to make sure New York is taken care of. Can't blame him for that, can you? I got to get running. Coming up tomorrow on the show, we've got the President and the Constitution. We're going to go to episode 3. Take care. Take the time right now. Tell the people that matter in your life you love them very much. You'd miss them if they weren't there, so don't pass up those opportunities. You don't want to have that regret. Plausibly Live, I'm Dave Bowman. This is my show, The Dave Bowman Show, right here on the Podcast 99 Internet Radio Network. This has been Constitution Thursday. If you like it, download it, share it, let people know. Comment. Love to hear from you. And we'll be back tomorrow, assuming I haven't clawed my eyes out of my head, for the President and the Constitution. Have a great day, everybody.